Warbles on a lot here with the dag end of Outsiders and First Dog on the Moon, I hope.
Interesting times, and the Fairfax situation, of course, still unresolved. Those workers still on the picket lines, but and where the job cuts fall remains a source of some industrial conversation, shall we say. It's been Outsiders this morning on Sunday Extra, and they have been James Carl, researcher from the Melbourne School of Government, the University of Melbourne. Man who's doing a bit of podcasting at the moment in and around the US election.
Yes.
Tell us quickly the name of that so we can find it.
G'day, Patriots.
There you go. Miriam Robin, media reporter for Crikey, and Adam Crichton, economics correspondent with The Australian. First Dog on the Moon. I think that might be next. School's in.
All right, that's enough. A bit of shush, please, children. This week, I have some important news. Some disturbing information has come to hand. Now, here at St. Kylie's, we are nothing if not tolerant of difference. We proudly celebrate everyone, whoever they may be. However, there have been some unfortunate incidents of what can only be described as homophobic bullying recently. And I understand that some of you are upset by the presence of homophobes in our school, but they are students here, so it's not okay to pick on them. I'm speaking particularly to the Year 10 students in the Sapphic Ladies Choir who were throwing freons at the white straight boys in Year 8. Now, it's not their fault, they're cisgendered heterosexuals. In fact, I think they've got enough on their plates having to be normal. So if you could show some tolerance, it would be appreciated. Tossing baked goods at people is just not on. And no, Francesca, it doesn't matter if the freons were gluten-free. And whoever it was who tied young Trevor from the 4th grade to the flagpole with gaff tape, and we will find out who it was when he gets back from the hospital, just because he's a member of the IPA Youth League doesn't mean it's okay to single him out for rough treatment. He can't help being who he is. What did you say, Affogato? Well, yes, you're right. Just because he's a racist doesn't mean he has to act like one, but even so, you need to leave him alone. I mean, what if people were unkind to you because of your gender or your sexual identity? Ah, yes, I could see you hadn't thought of that. Imagine how that must feel. Anyway, all of this is quite timely. You're all aware of the Safe Schools program, of course, which is, or at least was, about raising awareness of issues faced by LGBTI students. Well, the government is making some changes. They're making safe schools more, actually they're making it less gay, I suppose. And I am using the term in the derogatory sense. You should probably get used to it, children. This means, of course, that the Check Your Privilege readathon will now be a homosexual can be cured sausage sizzle. And Intersectionality Awareness Week is the Jesus wants me for a sunbeam morning tea. Also, you won't be able to buy sex toys in the canteen anymore. Safe Schools will also be covering a few different issues from now on. There will no longer be any discussion of frockery, thrustage, bum noodling, or fondlewinkling. Instead, we will be running workshops on things like how not to act on your ungodly urges, flagellation can be fun, what are some of the things that Jesus doesn't want you to put your penis in. If you do find yourself being bullied, well, you probably should have thought of that before you decided you were a giant whoopsie. Oh, I mean, I don't think that. I'm just reading from the course material. Now, I should also point out that Mr. Crockenbush, the social studies teacher, has been telling his Year 12 politics students that the right wing of the Federal Liberal Party is really just using safe schools to make trouble for the Prime Minister, and that they are happily endangering the lives of young LGBTI people for their own extreme political purposes. Yes, that's enough. We'd all like to thank Mr. Crockenbush for his long service and wish him well wherever he ends up. As the Lord says in Leviticus 14:35, I think mildew is on the wall of my house. I'm sure we can all take some comfort from that. Finally, any discussion of sexual identity will be limited to just one session per week, and you'll need permission from your parent or guardian to attend. Take the form home and, like every other student in the country, tell mum or dad that you'd like to do what they're now calling gay class. I'm sure gay class will be very well attended across the nation, especially when everyone sees the compulsory lavender uniform with the pink sash. Anyway, if anyone is feeling depressed or suicidal, the school counsellor is here on the first Tuesday of every month, or you can see the federally funded chaplain who's here every day. All right, that's enough for now. Let's all sing the school song. Mrs. Puddington, if you please.
First dog on the move with the maracas there. Coming up on our end, between the lines.
Okay, well, I've got to say I'm not real impressed with what the Greens did this week. Apparently, because the Greens have been polling somewhere around the 15%, they don't see themselves as being a minor party any longer. And at the last federal election, there was a bloke from the Motoring Enjoyment Party or something like that who got elected to the Senate after he only got something like 0.25% of the primary vote. But he'd done what's called a preference whispering deal among other people in minor parties, and some parties and some candidates appeared to have been entered in the election purely to facilitate these preference whispering deals. And what it boils down to is that 25% of the Australian electorate were voting for somebody other than the major parties in the Senate. They were not voting Liberal, they were not voting Labor, they were not voting National, they were not voting Greens, they were voting for somebody else. And these somebody else's were trading the preferences. So you give me my first preferences, your second preferences, I'll give my third preferences back to you. And what it boiled down to was people that nobody had ever heard of being put on the Senate for 6 years. And of course the major parties hated it. And it was a bit of a shock, and you know, you'd see this non-entity elevated to the Senate. Nobody would have any idea what they were going to do. And for a while, they'd be pretty quiet until they figured out what they wanted to say. And then, behold, after they've been there for a couple of months, they'd bite the hand of whoever it was who funded them to get in there, and they'd start thinking for himself and talking for himself. And they actually turn out to be a good thing. They sit on the cross benches, and it means that the 25% of the population who don't favour the major parties having total control, they get represented by a somewhat randomised popular figure. I liked that. The big parties didn't like it. The Greens decided that they're now a big party. So they've allied themselves with the Liberal Party. And now, instead of merely voting one above the line, which 96% of Australia was doing, you can now vote from 1 to 6 below the line rather than from 1 to 150 or however many candidates are on the tablecloth size ballot paper. So we still get a tablecloth size ballot paper, but you only have to label the first 6 numbers. And if none of those 6 people that you voted for is numbered 1 to 6, if none of them get elected, then your ballot gets exhausted. That means that, 20% or 19%, 21%, the people who were voting above the line for a minor style of a party, their ballot now gets exhausted because it won't go to anybody else. It means the Liberal Party can still do preference swaps with the National Party. The Labor Party can still do preference swaps within themselves and with the Greens, and the Greens can still do preference swaps with anybody who wants to trust the Greens. And as a long-term Green voter, I don't think I do trust the Greens. I think they've done a Democrats. Once upon a time, a lot of people used to like the Democrats because they kept the bastards honest, and then all of a sudden the Democrats reversed their campaign party political position and they supported John Howard's GST. And within 2 elections, there was no more Democrat Party. It just shriveled up and died. And I fear that this may happen to the Greens. I'm not really impressed with Adam Bandt's performance as leader. What it means locally for me as a functional practicing greenie who catches rainwater and stores it and drinks it and then pours sewage down rabbit burrows is that in my electorate, where I always used to vote Green as first preference, which means that the Greens get paid for my vote. Anybody who gets a quota of first preference votes, they actually get paid for the vote. I think you might have to get 5% of the vote in the electorate that you're standing in order to get paid. Otherwise, you don't get your deposit back. But if you get a sufficient number of votes, you get something like $2.50 for every person who gives you their first preference. So I've been giving the Greens my first preference, and I used to give Tony Windsor my second preference, knowing that the Greens were not actually going to be elected in the state, in the New England or Northern Tablelands, whether it was state or federal. But they'd get paid for it. The second preference would go to Tony Windsor in federal, and whoever I thought had the best policy platform in the state elections. So yeah, Tony Windsor was effectively getting my vote, but he wasn't getting paid for my vote. The Greens were getting paid for my vote. In this coming federal election, I don't know whether I'm actually going to vote one for the Greens, because they have grievously disappointed me in allying themselves with the Liberal Party to gerrymander the Senate, to disenfranchise 25% of the Australian electorate and make it virtually impossible for any minority party to ever get going again. They've pulled the drawbridge up after themselves, is what the Greens have done. And I think that's pretty bloody annoying. It is, in fact, at least as annoying as the backflip that Malcolm Turnbull has done this week with Tony Abbott and Corey Bernardi's hands so far up his arse that they're able to play simple melodies on the strings of his vocal cords. Apparently, in the National Party and the Liberal Party, there are people who are afraid that their children are poofters, lickety-split lesbians growing up underfoot. And they think that if they can hold their children in isolation so that their children never encounter the concept of same-sex attractiveness, then they will be able to be raised according to their parents' wishes to be full, true-believing, plugged-in members of the heterosexual, heteronormative community. And these Liberal and National Party homophobes are so paranoid that their own children might turn out to be poofters and lesbians, or transgenders who want to get their cocks cut off and have plastic vaginas carved in themselves, that they've had a collective conniption fit at the idea that the schools have been teaching the students that it's wrong to bash and bully poofters. And this deeply offends the right wing of the Liberal Party and the National Party. And they have successfully conducted a palace revolt. And Malcolm Turnbull, the wishy-washy trimmer who adjusts his course whichever way the wind's blowing so his sails are full and by, he did a frigging backflip. And he's decided to take out half of the stuff in the course. Because the Poofter-Bashers are in control of the Liberal Party and the National Party. The Poofter-Bashers are in control of the Liberal Party and the National Party. And, you know, I'm not making it up. It's what's actually happening. They've gerrymandered the Senate, and they don't want to teach children that it's wrong to bash and bully people for being homosexual. Life in Australia. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.